first edition of Cigars, Bourbon, and a Book. And I chose this book by John McWhorter called Woke Racism. I recruited a young gun to come in here and lead us in discussion. And this brother here, Jared Davis. So let's welcome Jared to this little book club.
All right. So Rodney graciously invited me into your space. Thank you for inviting me, welcoming me. My background is in international relations, Middle Eastern politics, Arabic language, but more generally, my bread and butter really is racism, understanding what it is, what it isn't, specifically anti-Blackness. From what I've learned about John McWhorter through interviews and also through reading about him is that he identifies himself as a liberal Democrat. Basically, to me, what that means is that he very much believes in our two-party system. He thinks that things as they are, or the status quo in America, could be fixed. The second bit is that I found it interesting that somebody who's been trained as a linguist, which is what John McWhorter has been trained as, he is a professor of linguistics at Columbia University, would choose to write a book about racism. One might think, right, that someone who's a political scientist, someone who's an economist, somebody who's a historian, someone who is a social scientist might be better placed to tackle such a big topic. And basically his perspective or his view is that this wokeness has diminished or silenced different perspectives on racism. People are afraid to speak their opinion, speak their mind about certain things for fear of being canceled. And this is eroding what he sees. And again, going back to the liberal democratic thing, that he very much focuses on our ability to be a democracy and to share opinions and to talk amongst ourselves about the issues of the day. He believes that affirmative action should be based on class rather than race, which is pretty interesting because I think when it comes to Blackness, the question is, are you poor because you're Black or are you Black because you're poor, right? I come from a generation where, you know, wokeness is very much a buzzword. We talk about it all the time. Who's woke, who isn't, who's conscious, who's not. I think that people in my generation and, you know, Gen Zers take this idea of wokeness for granted, but we never really ask older generations what they think, you know, wokeness actually is.
You know, you hear a lot of things now about being woke and then people being canceled and the cancel culture.
Right.
And you just, you know, kind of wonder, you know, when I was coming up, we really didn't think about that. I don't know about you.
Not at all.
You know, but we really didn't think about, you know, who was woke or who was being canceled. We were just living from day to day, basically.
But here's the thing, right? And this is why I started out the introduction by saying, depending on how you come to the table as a researcher, you know, as the old adage goes, there are so many ways to skin a cat, right? If you are an economist, you're going to look at racism from a completely different way than a political scientist is, or a historian, or a linguist in the case of John McWhorter, right? And I think what he fails to understand is, you know, there's this assumption that's what's driving this woke culture, quote unquote, is people and not necessarily economics or corporations, right? And what has happened, I think, in the last 10 years, especially as social media has picked up, especially as information comes available by second at your fingertips, is the idea that corporations very much understand that there are markets that need to be tapped into that aren't necessarily straight and white, right? More generally, I don't disagree with John McWhorter's, you know, sort of main thesis, right? Because his idea is that this idea of being canceled has gotten way out of whack, right? So people...
That's basically what he's saying in his book.
Right. People can't say what they want to. People can't, you know, voice their concerns. People can't, you know, talk about, you know, whatever it is that they feel, because at the end of the day, the only way we can get through is by actually going through it, right? If we just silence people and say, oh no, you're toxic, oh no, you are homophobic, oh no, you're anti-Black, oh no, you are anti-woman or whatever, then we don't really address the problem. We just pushing people under the rug and we saying whatever, get away from us, we can't see it.
Discussion about this book. I was wondering if he had come from an old school of apologists for racism, that we've always had for hundreds of years.
Amen.
In our struggle against racism. But then when I heard him a little bit more, one of the arguments that he was making is he thought that, for example, Ibrahim's book was overly simple, overly simplistic. And when he talked about, what was the lady's book about white fragility?
Yeah, Robin DiAngelo.
About Robin saying that white people needed to investigate and evaluate their own psychology of how they have contributed to racism, and he was essentially poo-pooing those. And I think that both of those books have validity because ultimately Ibrahim was talking about the effects of institutionalized racism, and that what we have to do is to build structures, policies, programs, and procedures to oppose the effects of racism in our daily lives.
White people, right? But returning to the idea that racism is a historical device, right? Or a historical technology, right? Black people only become black black people in our context, black people in the Western Hemisphere only become black in relation to the European. So the African in relation to the European during the transatlantic slave trade becomes transformed into the black individual, right?
Yes.
An individual, a black person in Nigeria, right, with other Nigerians is not black. He is Igbo, and the Igbo is to the Hausa as the Hausa is to the Fula, and the Fula is to the Ashanti as the Ashanti is to the Gan.
Yes,
right?
sir. Yes,
and
sir.
so, in that context, the perspective then becomes one of ethnicity, right?
Yes, sir.
But prior to the transatlantic slave trade, and this is why I sort of framed the idea of the British versus the Irish in this idea of the first documented case of racism, or like the first trial or tryout for racism, is that the British were basically saying, yes, what we're articulating is a class difference. What we're articulating is class exploitation. But it reaches the level of racism when we start talking about people's features. We start talking about people's geography. We start talking about where people come from, right? And so it becomes a racist idea when we say it's not just the skin color, because the Irish person is to the British person, they both white, right? They both have the same tone. But it reaches the level of racism when the British start talking about the Irish in the sense of, well, their heads are shaped this way, or they speak in this way, or they look this way. And so the economic processes, the fact that they're coming to us as people who are on bended knee, who are coming to us as people who are servants, who are coming to us as people who are servile. These ideas are condensed and sort of frozen by this idea that they look different, or that they are different, right?
Any final thoughts on John McWhorter's book? Any thoughts in terms of what he was talking about in his book in terms of woke racism?
Definitely thought-provoking, and makes you think and makes you want to sort of investigate your own personal thinking. Whether you fall into any of those classes that he defines, whether you're, in the religion thing, or whether you're classifying someone just because that's what you did all the time without really thinking about it, or going a little deeper. So definitely investigating more.
What amazes me is how the word woke has now been co-opted. Like, it's being used, I don't think, in the way that it was meant now. It's being used by others, not in the way that it was originally thought to be used. Because you're hearing it a lot more now. I'm like, well, what they know about being woke? What do you know about being woke? But it seems like they're using that for something else. I don't know exactly what it is.
Was Trump woke?
Could be.
That's a good question.
In what context?
Right?
That's
Right.
I'm telling you.
I think the people who stormed the Capitol
Yeah.
think so.
Yeah.
I think the people who stormed the Capitol think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're right.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a good point. I think it's. I'm glad we're having this discussion because it really stimulates discussion and evaluation. It makes me think about, the great debates that have happened throughout our history: Du Bois, Frederick Douglass, even Booker T. Washington, the school of intellectualism, like the Talented Tenth, versus Booker T. Washington's thoughts about, our people needed to concentrate more on developing skills and trades and feeding our family and educating our families. And we've had debates like this throughout our history. So I think even if we don't agree with all of the positions that are being advanced by McWhorter, at least we're having some discussions and really reassessing where we are in this battle against racism.
I have difficulty with this whole issue of being awake. I look at it in the sense that, from a simplistic standpoint, and my simplistic standpoint is this: being woke and coming to that realization and using it in the political realm, as you mentioned, and Ocasio-Cortez, and it has to drift down into the body politic, and basically saying or coming to the conclusion that, look, these people are not woke, and we need to do something about it. And what it transcends into is the legislature, because nothing can be done where you have, for example, this idea of this division. And so the question is, when I look at Fox, or I look at all of these, the Trumpists, are they woke? And so my question is, using wokeness should achieve something. And what is it that we're trying to achieve with wokeness?
Wokeness, unfortunately, is in the eye of the beholder. And so we're all just talking at each other in our echo chambers.
Yes.
And aren't really communicating. And unfortunately, because we exist in an environment where everything can be readily monetized, people take advantage of that.
Right.
And so you have people who, might not necessarily be best suited to be having these conversations, but who want to have these conversations because they can make money off of them. Right.
So you're saying they're woke because of the economic benefit?
Yeah. And maybe that's a cynical, takeaway or viewpoint, but yeah, it's wokeness for the dollar.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point you made earlier with the companies, right? All of a sudden the company is woke because they've realized that they can make a whole lot of money off this particular sector, this particular part of the population. So
NFL is trying
the NFL, they weren't woke a few years ago, but now they're woke.
No, they barred Boyd for taking his knee, and then now they like, hold on,
Yeah.
we want to get into it.
Because
they hired Jay-Z.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly want to thank you guys for coming out tonight and joining in on this conversation on this book, and very enlightening. Jared, thank you for.
Thank you, brother
leading
Jared.
us. We appreciate it, and we look forward to the next time.
All right.